The autumn rain fell steadily on the cracked pavement of Pete Rose's neighborhood in Cincinnati, Ohio. Each droplet seemed to echo the emptiness that had consumed his life over the past 3 years. At 68 years old, Pete shuffled down Vine Street with his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn-out Reds jacket, the same one he had worn during better days when crowds still cheered his name. The street was nearly deserted at this hour, just past 6 in the evening. The few people who passed by kept their heads down, hurrying through the cold October drizzle toward the warmth of their homes and families. Pete had nowhere urgent to be. His small apartment 3 blocks away held nothing but silence, old photographs he could barely stand to look at, and memories that cut deeper than any physical wound. His daughter Katie had stopped calling 2 months ago after their last argument. His son, Pete Jr., lived in Colorado now and rarely picked up the phone. The distance between them had grown into a chasm Pete no longer knew how to cross. Every attempt at conversation ended the same way, with uncomfortable silences and hasty goodbyes that left him feeling more isolated than before. The neighborhood had changed dramatically since his glory days. The old record shop where he used to buy vinyl was now a vape store. The diner where teammates gathered for breakfast had been replaced by a payday loan office. Even Crossley Terrace, where kids once played baseball until the streetlights came on, had been converted into a parking lot for luxury apartments Pete could never afford. He walked past Murphy's Bar, where golden light spilled onto the wet sidewalk. Through the foggy windows, he could see people laughing, clinking glasses, living lives that seemed impossibly distant from his own reality. There was a time when he would have been welcomed inside, when bartenders would have insisted his money was no good there. Now, he was just another face in the crowd, another forgotten athlete whose best years were catalogued in dusty record books that younger generations never opened. The rain intensified as Pete turned onto Westcourt Street. His shoes, old sneakers with worn-out soles, were already soaked through. He could feel the cold water seeping into his socks with each step, but he barely registered the discomfort. Physical pain had become just another background noise in his life, no more significant than the distant traffic or the rhythmic patter of rain on metal awnings. That was when he heard it, a sound so faint and pitiful that he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. A whimper, weak and desperate, coming from the narrow alley between a closed laundromat and a pawn shop that advertised cash for gold in flickering neon letters. Pete stopped walking. His first instinct was to keep moving, to mind his own business, as he had learned to do in a city that had grown indifferent to suffering. But something about that sound pierced through the armor of apathy he had built around himself. It reminded him of vulnerability, of needing help that might never come. He turned toward the alley, squinting through the rain. The narrow passage was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a streetlight half a block away. Garbage bags were piled against the brick walls, and puddles reflected the orange haze of the city sky. For a moment he saw nothing, then the whimper came again, and he spotted movement near an overflowing dumpster. Cautiously, Pete stepped into the alley. The smell of rotting food and stagnant water hit him immediately, but he pressed forward. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw what had made the sound. Huddled against the wet brick wall, shivering violently, was a dog. It was impossible to determine what breed or mix of breeds the animal might be. Its fur was so matted with mud and grime that it looked almost black in the dim light. The dog was painfully thin, ribs visible even through its dirty coat. One of its ears was torn, and there was a deep gash on its left hind leg that looked infected. But it was the dog's eyes that stopped Pete in his tracks. Those eyes held a mixture of fear and desperate hope that Pete recognized all too well. It was the same expression he saw in his own mirror every morning, the look of someone who had been beaten down by life but still clung to the possibility that things might somehow get better. The dog tried to stand when it saw Pete approaching, but its injured leg gave out and it collapsed back into the puddle where it had been lying. It let out another weak whimper, and Pete felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for years. He knelt down slowly, ignoring the cold water that immediately soaked through his jeans. The dog flinched away from him, pressing itself against the wall as if expecting a blow. Pete had seen that reaction before in animals and people alike. This dog had been hurt, probably many times, by humans who should have protected it. "Hey there, buddy," Pete said softly, his voice rusty from lack of use. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." The dog watched him with those haunted eyes, but didn't try to run. It probably couldn't run, even if it wanted to. Pete noticed that in addition to the injured leg, the dog's paws were raw and bleeding, worn down from walking on harsh pavement without any protection or care. Pete had nothing to offer, no food in his pockets, no treats, no leash. He had barely enough money to feed himself these days. The modest pension from his years in baseball was stretched thin by rent, utilities, and the occasional groceries he picked up at the discount market on the east side of town. Taking in a stray dog, especially one that clearly needed expensive veterinary care, was the last thing a logical person in his situation would do. But logic had abandoned Pete Rose a long time ago. Around the same time, hope had packed its bags and left. What remained was something more basic, more human, a recognition of suffering and a fundamental inability to walk away from it, even when walking away would be easier. He reached out his hand slowly, palm up, letting the dog see he meant no harm. The animal sniffed cautiously at his fingers, its wet nose cold against his skin. Then, with what seemed like a monumental effort, the dog lifted its head and placed it gently in Pete's palm. That simple gesture of trust broke something open inside Pete. Tears mixed with the rain on his face as he carefully slid his other hand under the dog's emaciated body. The animal was lighter than it should be, all bones and matted fur, but it didn't struggle as Pete lifted it. Instead, it seemed to relax slightly, as if grateful to finally stop fighting. "All right, buddy," Pete whispered, cradling the dog against his chest and feeling its rapid heartbeat against his own. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He had no plan, no clear idea of what he would do next. His apartment building had a strict no pets policy, and even if it didn't, he had no money for a vet, no supplies, nothing that a responsible pet owner should have. But as Pete carried the trembling dog out of that dark alley and back into the rain-soaked street, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. For the first time in recent memory, Pete Rose had something that needed him, something that depended on him for survival. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing, but instead, it felt like the first real thing he had held in his hands since his wife Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. The walk back to his apartment took twice as long as usual. Pete moved carefully, trying to shield the dog from the rain with his jacket while maintaining his balance on the slippery sidewalk. Several people passed by, giving him strange looks, but Pete didn't care. Let them stare, let them judge. He had been judged his entire life by sports commentators, by fans, by his own children. One more set of disapproving eyes meant nothing. His apartment building was a 5-story walk-up with peeling paint and a front door that never quite closed properly. The lobby smelled like boiled cabbage and cigarette smoke, a combination Pete had grown so accustomed to that he barely noticed it anymore. The elevator had been broken for 6 months, so he began the climb to his 3rd-floor apartment, moving slowly to avoid jostling the injured dog. By the time he reached his door, Pete was breathing hard and his arms ached from carrying the animal. He fumbled with his keys, finally getting the door open and stepping into the small space he'd called home for the past year. The apartment was modest to the point of being sparse. A worn couch faced a small television on a cheap stand. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person, with a 2-burner stove and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. Through an open door, his unmade bed was visible, clothes scattered on the floor around it. The walls were mostly bare, except for a single-framed photograph of Sarah that he had finally been able to hang after 2 years of keeping it in a drawer. Pete carried the dog directly to the bathroom, the only room with a door he could close. He gently set the animal down in the bathtub, where it lay without moving, watching him with those same haunted, hopeful eyes. "Okay, buddy," Pete said, his voice sounding strange in the small tiled space. "Let's see what we can do about getting you cleaned up." He turned on the tap, adjusting the temperature until the water ran warm but not hot. The dog flinched at the sound, but didn't try to escape as Pete carefully began wetting its matted fur. The water that ran down the drain was brown with dirt and darker with what Pete suspected was dried blood. As he worked, using his own shampoo because he had nothing else, Pete talked to the dog in a low, steady voice. He told it about his day, about the rain, about nothing in particular. The words didn't matter. What mattered was the tone, the gentle reassurance that someone cared, that the dog was no longer alone in its suffering. Slowly, carefully, Pete began to see what the dog actually looked like beneath all the dirt and matted fur. It was a medium-sized animal, maybe 40 pounds at a healthy weight, though it couldn't weigh more than 25 now. Its coat, once the mud was washed away, was a mix of brown and white with distinctive markings around its face that reminded Pete of a border collie, though there was clearly some other breed mixed in there too. The injured leg looked worse once it was clean. The gash was deep and showed signs of infection, with red, inflamed skin around the edges. The dog whimpered when Pete gently touched the area, and he immediately pulled his hand back. "I know, buddy. I know it hurts. We'll figure something out, I promise." It was a promise Pete had no idea how to keep. He had maybe $80 in his wallet, and that needed to last him until his next pension check arrived in 2 weeks. A visit to the emergency vet would cost hundreds, maybe thousands. He didn't have credit cards anymore. He had nothing except the few bills in his worn leather wallet and a determination that surprised him with its intensity. After the bath, Pete wrapped the dog in his only good towel, the one he usually saved for when his kids visited, back when they still visited. He carried the animal to the living room and set it gently on the couch, then went to the kitchen to see what food he could offer. His refrigerator revealed its usual sparse contents. A half-empty carton of eggs, some wilted lettuce he should have thrown out days ago, a container of leftover rice from the Chinese place down the street, and 3 cans of beer. In the freezer, he found a package of ground beef he had been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. Pete thawed the meat in the microwave and cooked it in a pan, breaking it into small pieces. He added some of the rice to make it more digestible, then let it cool before bringing it to the dog. The animal's reaction to the food was heartbreaking. It ate with desperate gulping bites, as if afraid the meal might be taken away at any moment. Pete had to stop it several times, worried it would make itself sick by eating too fast. He rationed out the food slowly, watching as the dog ate every single bite and then licked the plate clean. "When did you last eat, buddy?" Pete asked softly. "Days? Weeks?" The dog looked up at him, and Pete could have sworn he saw gratitude in those dark eyes. He reached out and gently stroked the animal's head, feeling it lean into his touch. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Pete Rose smiled. That night, Pete gave up his bed to the dog and slept on the couch. It wasn't a sacrifice. The couch was where he usually ended up anyway, falling asleep in front of late-night television programs he didn't really watch. But knowing the dog was comfortable, warm, and safe made the cramped position and aching back worth it. As he lay there in the darkness, listening to the rain continue its steady drumming against the windows, Pete thought about the day's events. He had left his apartment that morning with no purpose beyond killing time until it was acceptable to go to sleep. He was returning to bed having made a choice that would complicate his already difficult life in countless ways. Yet somehow, despite the practical problems this decision created, Pete felt lighter than he had in years. The crushing loneliness that usually pressed down on him had eased just slightly. There was another heartbeat in the apartment now, another living thing that depended on him. Pete didn't believe in fate or destiny or any of the superstitious nonsense some of his old teammates used to swear by. He didn't think the universe had put that dog in his path for some grand cosmic reason. But he did believe in choices, in the simple human decision to help or to walk away. He had spent the last 3 years walking away from everything, from memories, from relationships, from life itself. Tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Pete Rose had walked towards something instead. As sleep finally began to claim him, Pete's last conscious thought was a question that would have seemed absurd just hours earlier. What would he name the dog? Every creature deserved a name, an identity beyond just being another forgotten soul struggling to survive on the harsh streets of Cincinnati. The answer came to him just as he drifted off. Charlie. He would call the dog Charlie after his grandfather, Charles Rose, who had taught Pete everything he knew about baseball and about being a decent human being. Grandpa Charlie had been the one person who never judged Pete, who loved him unconditionally, regardless of his mistakes or failures. It seemed fitting that the dog who had appeared in Pete's life at his lowest point should carry that name. Maybe, Pete thought as consciousness slipped away, maybe this was a second chance, not for redemption or glory or any of the things he had lost, just a chance to be the kind of person Grandpa Charlie had always believed he could be. A person who didn't walk away when someone needed help. Pete woke to something he hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being needed. His back ached from the uncomfortable angle of the couch, his neck was stiff, and the morning light streaming through the thin curtains was too bright. But before he could sink back into the familiar fog of purposeless existence, he heard a soft whimper from the bedroom. Charlie. The events of the previous night came flooding back as Pete pushed himself upright, wincing at the protests from his aging joints. He made his way to the bedroom, where he found Charlie still lying on the bed, exactly where Pete had left him. The dog lifted its head when Pete entered, its tail making a weak attempt at wagging. In the morning light, Charlie looked even worse than he had the night before. The cleaned fur revealed just how malnourished the animal was, every rib visible beneath the patchy coat. The injured leg had swollen overnight, and the infection was clearly worse than Pete had initially thought. Charlie needed professional medical attention, and he needed it soon. Pete sat on the edge of the bed and gently stroked Charlie's head. "Morning, buddy. How are you feeling?" Charlie responded by licking Pete's hand, a gesture that seemed to require significant effort. Pete's heart ached at the trust this abused, injured animal was placing in him. He couldn't let Charlie down. He wouldn't. But the practical reality of the situation hit Pete hard as he made his way to the kitchen. He opened his wallet and counted the bills inside, $73. He checked his bank account on his phone, though he already knew what the balance would be. $218, and that had to cover rent, utilities, and food for the next 2 weeks. Pete made coffee in his ancient coffee maker, the only sound in the apartment the gurgling of the machine and Charlie's occasional whimper from the other room. As he waited for the coffee to brew, Pete stared at the phone number for Cincinnati Animal Care written on a scrap of paper taped to his refrigerator. He had grabbed it years ago when Sarah had talked about maybe getting a dog someday, a someday that never came. He could call them. They would take Charlie, get him medical care, find him a home with someone who had the resources to properly care for him. It would be the responsible thing to do, the logical thing. But the thought of handing Charlie over to strangers, of walking away from the first living thing that had needed him in years, made Pete's stomach turn. He had walked away from too many things already. His marriage, when Sarah had been dying and he had been too paralyzed by fear and grief to be the support she needed. His relationships with his children, letting them drift away rather than fighting to maintain the connection. His own dignity, surrendering to isolation and self-pity instead of trying to rebuild his life. No, not this time. Somehow, some way, Pete would find a solution that didn't involve abandoning Charlie. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the small kitchen table opening his laptop. The ancient machine took several minutes to boot up, and Pete used that time to give Charlie some water and check on his condition. The dog drank eagerly, but couldn't put any weight on the injured leg. Pete carefully examined the wound, which was definitely infected and getting worse by the hour. Back at his laptop, Pete began researching low-cost veterinary clinics in Cincinnati. There were several, but even their reduced rates were more than he could afford. The cheapest clinic he found estimated that treating an infected wound with antibiotics and follow-up care would cost at least $300, and that was if no surgery was required. Pete ran his hands through his thinning hair, a gesture of frustration that had become habitual over the years. $300 might as well have been $3,000. He didn't have it, and he had no way of getting it. Or did he? Pete's eyes drifted to the small cardboard box in the corner of his living room, the one he had been avoiding looking at for months. Inside that box was his past, or at least the parts of it he had managed to hold on to. Baseball memorabilia from his playing days, signed balls, photographs, a jersey from his 3,000th hit, things Sarah had insisted he keep, even when money got tight. He had always told himself those items were untouchable, sacred memories that connected him to the person he used to be. But as he heard Charlie whimper again from the bedroom, Pete realized that holding on to the past was preventing him from doing something meaningful in the present. He pulled the box from the corner and opened it, dust swirling in the morning sunlight. Inside were dozens of items, each one tied to a specific memory. The ball from his first major league home run. A photograph of him and Sarah on their wedding day, both of them impossibly young and full of hope. His grandfather's old baseball glove, worn leather that still smelled faintly of Neat's foot oil. Pete's hands trembled as he picked up a signed baseball from the 1975 World Series. He remembered that game like it was yesterday, the crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, the feeling that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. This ball was worth money. Not a fortune, but enough to cover Charlie's vet bills, and then some. He could take it to one of the sports memorabilia shops downtown. They would give him cash, no questions asked. It would be gone forever, but Charlie would get the medical care he desperately needed. The decision should have been harder. These items were all Pete had left from his glory days, tangible proof that his life had once mattered, that he had once been someone. But as he looked at the ball in his hand, Pete realized something that had been hiding beneath years of self-pity and regret. Those memories didn't live in objects, they lived in him. The experiences, the relationships, the person he had been, none of that could be taken away or sold. What made Pete Rose who he was had nothing to do with signed baseballs or framed photographs. It was in his hands, his heart, his choices, and right now he was choosing to help a dog that had no one else. Pete grabbed the World Series ball and 3 other items he knew would fetch a decent price. He carefully placed them in a plastic bag, then went to check on Charlie one more time before heading out. "I'll be back soon, buddy," Pete said, kneeling beside the bed and stroking Charlie's head. "I'm going to get you some help. Just hold on for me, okay?" Charlie looked at him with those trusting eyes, and Pete felt his resolve strengthen. This was the right decision. Maybe the first truly right decision he had made in years. The walk to Legends Sports Memorabilia on Elm Street took 20 minutes. The rain from the previous night had stopped, but the sky remained gray and heavy with the promise of more to come. Cincinnati in late October was like that, caught between the fading warmth of autumn and the harsh cold of approaching winter. Pete had walked past this shop countless times, but had never been inside. The windows displayed jerseys, balls, photographs, pieces of sports history frozen behind glass. A sign advertised that they bought and sold memorabilia, offering fair prices and immediate cash. A bell chimed as Pete pushed open the door. The interior was cramped and cluttered, every available surface covered with sports artifacts. Baseballs in plexiglass cases, jerseys mounted on walls, photographs of athletes from every era. The smell was a mixture of old paper, leather, and something else Pete couldn't quite identify. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s, wearing a Reds jersey, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he examined something through a magnifying glass. He looked up when Pete entered, and his eyes widened in recognition. "Pete Rose," the man said, his voice filled with a mixture of surprise and something that might have been awe. "I can't believe it. You're Pete Rose." Pete nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. There was a time when he would have loved this recognition, would have fed off it. Now it just made him feel exposed, vulnerable. "I need to sell some items," Pete said, getting straight to the point. He placed the plastic bag on the counter. "How much can you give me for these?" The shop owner's hands were gentle as he removed the items from the bag, laying them out on the counter like sacred relics. He examined each piece carefully, using his magnifying glass to check signatures and authenticate the items. Pete watched, feeling both relief and a deep sadness as he saw these pieces of his past being evaluated for their market value. "These are incredible," the shop owner said softly. "Genuine Pete Rose memorabilia, signed. The World Series ball alone is worth at least $400, maybe more to the right collector. And this photograph, is this you and Johnny Bench?" "Yeah," Pete said, his voice rough, "after we won the pennant in '72. The shop owner continued his examination, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper. Pete tried not to think about the memories attached to each item, tried to focus on why he was doing this. For Charlie, for something that needed him now, not for a past that was already gone. Finally, the shop owner looked up. "I can give you $800 for everything." "That's a fair price, and I'm paying in cash right now. These are valuable items, Mr. Rose. Are you sure you want to sell them?" $800. More than Pete had expected, more than enough for Charlie's medical care and some left over for food and supplies. But the reality of what he was about to do hit him hard. Once these items were sold, they were gone forever. He would never get them back. Pete thought about his grandfather, about what Charlie Sr. would have said in this situation. He remembered a conversation from decades ago when Pete was just starting his career and already developing a reputation for being obsessed with his statistics and legacy. "Records and trophies are fine, Pete," his grandfather had said, "but they won't keep you warm at night. They won't love you when you're old. What matters is the person you are when nobody's watching, when there's nothing to gain. That's who you really are." Pete looked at the shop owner and nodded. "I'm sure. I need the money for something important." The transaction took only a few minutes. The shop owner counted out 8 crisp $100 bills, made Pete sign some paperwork, and carefully stored the memorabilia in a safe. Pete pocketed the money, thanked the man, and walked out of the shop before he could change his mind. The weight in his pocket was substantial, both physically and emotionally. $800. It was the most money Pete had held in months, maybe years, and he was about to spend most of it on a stray dog he had known for less than 24 hours. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on Pete. A year ago, hell, a week ago, he would have called this plan insane. He barely had enough money to take care of himself. What business did he have trying to care for an injured animal? But walking back toward his apartment, with the cash in his pocket and Charlie waiting for him, Pete felt something that had been absent from his life for too long. He felt like he mattered. His next stop was the West Side Veterinary Clinic, a small practice he had found in his online search that morning. The building was modest, a converted house with a parking lot that had seen better days. But the reviews online had been good, and more importantly, they advertised affordable care and payment plans. The waiting room was busy when Pete arrived, filled with pet owners and their animals. A young woman held a cat carrier on her lap, from which angry meows periodically emerged. An elderly man sat with an ancient-looking basset hound at his feet. A harried mother tried to control 3 children who were more interested in roughhousing than in the family dog they had presumably brought in for treatment. Pete approached the reception desk, where a woman with kind eyes and graying hair looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to bring in a dog," Pete explained. "He's at my apartment about 3 blocks from here. He's a stray I found last night, and he's got an infected wound on his leg. He can't walk, and I don't have a car. Is there any way someone could come with me to help get him here?" The receptionist's expression softened. "Let me talk to Dr. Martinez. She's our vet on duty today. Just give me a moment." She disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only," and Pete stood awkwardly in the waiting room, feeling the eyes of other pet owners on him. He probably looked as rough as Charlie did, worn clothes, unshaven, the appearance of someone barely holding things together. Because that's exactly what he was. After a few minutes, the receptionist returned with a woman in her mid-40s, wearing scrubs decorated with cartoon dogs and cats. She had an air of competence and warmth that immediately put Pete at ease. "Hi, I'm Dr. Martinez," she said, extending her hand. Pete shook it, grateful for the firm, professional grip. "Jenny tells me you found a stray that needs help." Pete nodded and explained the situation, finding Charlie in the alley, the injured leg, the infection, his inability to transport the dog on his own. Dr. Martinez listened carefully, asking occasional questions about Charlie's condition and behavior. "Okay," she said when Pete finished. "I'll come with you. We can use a portable carrier and bring him back here for examination. It's a slow morning, and this sounds urgent." Relief washed over Pete. "Thank you. I have money," he added quickly, not wanting them to think he was looking for charity. "I can pay for the treatment." Dr. Martinez smiled. "Let's worry about that after we see what we're dealing with. Come on, let's go get your dog." The walk back to Pete's apartment was quiet. Dr. Martinez carried a large pet carrier and a medical bag, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Pete found himself telling her about finding Charlie, about the condition the dog was in, about the bath and the makeshift meal. "You probably saved his life," Dr. Martinez said as they climbed the stairs to Pete's third-floor apartment. "A few more days out there in this weather, with that infection, and he might not have made it." Pete hadn't thought about it in those terms. He had simply seen a creature in need and responded. But hearing Dr. Martinez say, it made the reality sink in. Charlie might have died if Pete had walked past that alley. The thought made him feel sick. Charlie was still on the bed where Pete had left him. The dog's tail wagged weakly when he saw Pete, but he barely reacted to Dr. Martinez's presence. Pete took that as a bad sign. A healthy dog would have at least been curious about a stranger. Dr. Martinez set down her equipment and approached Charlie slowly, speaking in the same calm, gentle tone Pete had used the night before. She carefully examined the dog, checking his vitals, looking at his teeth and gums, gently palpating his abdomen. When she got to the injured leg, Charlie whimpered, but didn't try to bite or pull away. "Okay, Charlie," Dr. Martinez said. Pete must have mentioned the name during their walk. "You're a very good boy. We're going to get you feeling better, I promise." She stood up and turned to Pete, her expression serious. "The infection is significant. He needs antibiotics immediately, and I'll need to clean and dress the wound properly. He's severely malnourished and dehydrated, which complicates things. I'd like to keep him at the clinic for at least a day, get him on IV fluids, and start the antibiotics. After that, if he responds well to treatment, you can take him home with oral medications." "How much?" Pete asked, the question that had been weighing on him since he walked into the clinic. "Doctor," Martinez pulled out a tablet and made some calculations. "For the initial treatment, hospitalization, medications, and follow-up care, we're looking at around $450. That's with our stray discount," she added. "We have a program for people who rescue animals off the street." $450. Pete had enough, with money left over. He felt dizzy with relief. "I can pay that," he said. "I have cash." "Doctor." Martinez looked at him for a long moment, and Pete wondered what she saw. A broken-down ex-athlete? A lonely old man grasping at purpose? Or maybe just someone trying to do the right thing? "Let's get Charlie to the clinic," she said finally. "We'll talk about payment after we know he's stable." Getting Charlie into the carrier was easier than Pete expected. The dog seemed to understand that these people were trying to help him. He lay quietly as Dr. Martinez gently placed him inside, only whimpering slightly when the movement jostled his injured leg. The walk back to the clinic seemed longer than before. Pete carried the pet carrier carefully, and he could feel Charlie's weight shifting inside as the dog tried to find a comfortable position. Every whimper tore at Pete's heart, but he kept moving, kept telling Charlie that everything would be okay soon. At the clinic, Dr. Martinez took Charlie straight to the examination room. Pete wanted to go with them, but the receptionist, Jenny, gently guided him back to the waiting room. "Dr. Martinez is the best," Jenny assured him. "Your Charlie is in good hands. Why don't you have a seat? Can I get you some coffee?" Pete accepted gratefully, sinking into one of the plastic chairs and accepting the styrofoam cup Jenny brought him. The coffee was terrible, bitter, and lukewarm, but Pete drank it anyway. It gave him something to do with his hands. The wait felt endless. Pete watched other pet owners come and go, watched the clock on the wall tick forward with agonizing slowness. He thought about Charlie alone in that examination room, being poked and prodded, and hoped the dog understood that this discomfort was necessary. He thought about the memorabilia he had sold, the pieces of his past, now gone forever. Strange that it didn't hurt more. Maybe because for the first time in years, Pete was focused on the future instead of dwelling in the past. Whatever happened with Charlie, Pete had made a choice to help, rather than to walk away. That meant something. After almost 2 hours, Dr. Martinez emerged from the back, pulling off her latex gloves. Pete stood up so quickly, he nearly spilled the remains of his cold coffee. "Charlie's stable," Dr. Martinez said, and Pete felt his knees go weak with relief. "We've cleaned and bandaged the wound. Started him on IV antibiotics and fluids. The infection was worse than I thought, and he's going to need at least a week of oral antibiotics after we discharge him. But I think we caught it in time. He's a fighter." "Can I see him?" Pete asked. Dr. Martinez nodded. "Come on back. He's resting, but I think seeing you would be good for him." She led Pete through the staff door and down a hallway lined with cages. In one of the larger ones, Pete saw Charlie lying on a soft blanket, an IV line running to his front leg. The dog looked small and vulnerable, but when he saw Pete, his tail began to wag. Pete knelt beside the cage, and Dr. Martinez opened it so he could reach in and stroke Charlie's head. The dog licked his hand, and Pete had to blink back tears. "You're going to be okay, buddy," Pete whispered. "You're going to be just fine." Dr. Martinez watched this interaction with a soft smile. "He's lucky to have found you, Mr. Rose. Not many people would have stopped to help." Pete looked up at her, surprised that she had recognized him. "You know who I am." "My father was a huge Reds fan," she said. "I grew up watching you play. He always said you were the hardest working player he'd ever seen, that you never gave up on anything." Pete didn't know how to respond to that. He had given up on plenty of things over the years. But maybe, he thought, as he continued stroking Charlie's head, maybe it wasn't too late to be that person again. "Thank you, Dr. Martinez," Pete said quietly, "for everything." "Call me Maria," she replied, "and you're welcome. Charlie can go home tomorrow afternoon if he continues to improve overnight. I'll send you home with medications and instructions. He's going to need a lot of care for the next few weeks." Pete nodded, already mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. "I'll take care of him, I promise." As he left the clinic that afternoon, having paid the $450 and feeling the lightness of his wallet, Pete Rose walked with more purpose than he had felt in years. He had $350 left from the memorabilia sale, enough to buy dog food, supplies, and get through until his next pension check. More importantly, he had something to live for beyond just getting through another empty day. Charlie needed him, and Pete wasn't going to let him down. The autumn wind had picked up, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and distant rain. Pete pulled his jacket tighter and headed toward the pet supply store he had noticed a few blocks from his apartment. He had a lot to prepare before bringing Charlie home tomorrow. For the first time in 3 years, Pete Rose had a reason to look forward to tomorrow. The morning Pete brought Charlie home from the clinic, Cincinnati was wrapped in thick fog that made the streets look ghostly and unfamiliar. Pete arrived at the Westside Veterinary Clinic at 9 o'clock sharp, the earliest time Dr. Martinez had said he could pick up Charlie. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with preparations and worries about whether he could actually handle taking care of an injured dog. His apartment had been transformed overnight. With the money left over from selling his memorabilia, Pete had purchased the essentials: dog food, bowls, a proper bed, toys, a leash and collar, and supplies for wound care. He had spent hours the previous evening watching YouTube videos about dog care, taking notes on his phone like he used to study opposing pitchers before a big game. Jenny at the reception desk smiled when she saw him. "Right on time, Mr. Rose. Let me get Maria for you." While he waited, Pete noticed a bulletin board covered with photographs of happy pets and their owners, success stories of animals that had been treated at the clinic. He wondered if Charlie would end up on that board someday, healthy and whole. Dr. Martinez emerged carrying Charlie in her arms, and Pete's heart lifted at the sight. The dog looked infinitely better than he had just 24 hours ago. His eyes were brighter, more alert. The filthy, matted coat had been professionally groomed, revealing that Charlie was actually a handsome mix of breeds with a predominantly brown and white coat and intelligent, expressive eyes. "Someone's very happy to see you," Maria said as Charlie's tail began wagging vigorously. She set him down carefully, and Charlie immediately hobbled over to Pete on 3 legs, keeping his injured hind leg raised. Pete knelt down and Charlie pressed against him, whining with what sounded like relief. "Hey, buddy," Pete said, his voice thick with emotion. "Ready to come home?" Maria handed Pete a bag filled with medications, written instructions, and follow-up appointment cards. "He's doing remarkably well. The infection is responding to antibiotics, but he needs to finish the entire course. 10 more days. I've included pain medication too. Keep the wound clean and dry, change the bandage daily using the supplies I've given you, and watch for any signs of the infection worsening, increased swelling, discharge, or if he seems more lethargic." Pete listened carefully, committing every instruction to memory. Maria walked him through the medications, showing him how to give Charlie the pills hidden in food, how to properly clean and dress the wound. She gave him her cell phone number, which Pete knew wasn't standard practice, and told him to call any time if he had concerns. "You're doing a good thing, Pete," Maria said as they prepared to leave. "Not just for Charlie, but for yourself too. Dogs have a way of healing us while we heal them." Pete wasn't sure he believed in that kind of therapeutic mysticism, but he nodded anyway. What he did believe was that having Charlie depending on him gave him a reason to get up in the morning, a purpose beyond just existing. The walk home was slow and careful. Pete had borrowed a pet carrier from the clinic, and Charlie rode inside, occasionally pressing his nose against the mesh to look out at the world passing by. Pete found himself talking to the dog as they walked, pointing out landmarks like they were on a tour. "That's Murphy's Bar," Pete said as they passed the establishment. "Used to spend a lot of time there back in the day. Not so much anymore. And there's the corner store where I buy my groceries. The owner, Mr. Chen, he's been there 30 years. Nice guy, doesn't talk much, which I appreciate." Back at the apartment, Pete carefully carried Charlie up the 3 flights of stairs. His back protested, his arms ached, but he didn't care. When he opened the door to his apartment and set Charlie's carrier down, he felt a surge of pride at what he'd accomplished in 24 hours. The living room had been reorganized. Pete's old clothes and newspapers had been cleared away. A soft dog bed sat in the corner near the window, where afternoon sunlight would warm it. Food and water bowls were positioned in the kitchen, clean and ready. The apartment still wasn't much, but it was cleaner and more organized than it had been in months. Pete opened the carrier and helped Charlie out, supporting his hindquarters so he wouldn't put weight on the injured leg. The dog immediately began exploring the apartment, sniffing everything, his tail wagging constantly. Despite his injury and obvious discomfort, Charlie seemed happy, and that happiness was infectious. "Welcome home, Charlie," Pete said softly. The first few days were an adjustment for both of them. Pete had to relearn how to structure his day around someone else's needs. Charlie required medications 3 times a day, wound care twice daily, regular trips outside for bathroom breaks, which was complicated by his injured leg, and constant supervision to make sure he didn't aggravate his wound. But Pete found himself adapting with surprising ease. He set alarms on his phone for medication times. He carried Charlie down the stairs for bathroom breaks, standing in the cold while Charlie did his business on 3 legs, then carrying him back up. He learned to clean and dress the wound with steady hands, talking to Charlie in a calm voice while the dog endured the uncomfortable process. The nights were the hardest. Charlie had nightmares, whimpering and crying in his sleep, his legs twitching as he relived whatever trauma he had endured before Pete found him. The first time it happened, Pete got up from the couch where he had been sleeping and went to Charlie's bed, sitting on the floor beside it and stroking the dog's head until he calmed down. "It's okay, buddy," Pete whispered in the darkness. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." After that first night, Pete moved Charlie's bed into his bedroom, close enough that he could reach down and comfort the dog when the nightmares came. His own sleep suffered, but Pete didn't mind. For years, he had slept fitfully, haunted by his own demons. At least now, when he woke in the night, it was to help someone else, rather than just staring at the ceiling, consumed by regret. A week after bringing Charlie home, Pete received a phone call that would change everything. He was in the middle of giving Charlie his afternoon medication when his cell phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. These days, unknown numbers were usually telemarketers or debt collectors, but something made him answer. "Is this Pete Rose?" a woman's voice asked. "Yeah, who's this?" "Mr. Rose, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a reporter with the Cincinnati Enquirer. I was at Legends Sports Memorabilia yesterday, doing a story on local collectibles, and the owner told me about you selling your memorabilia to pay for veterinary care for a stray dog. I'd really like to talk to you about that story." Pete's first instinct was to hang up. He had dealt with reporters before, and those experiences had rarely ended well. But something in Jennifer Walsh's tone, genuine interest without the predatory edge he remembered from his playing days, made him hesitate. "I don't know," Pete said slowly. "It's not really a big deal. Just helped out a dog that needed it." "Mr. Rose, in a world where the news is usually bad, this is a story about human kindness and second chances. Both for you and for Charlie. People need to hear stories like this. Would you consider meeting with me? Just coffee, 30 minutes of your time. If you don't like the angle I'm taking, we don't have to run the story." Pete looked at Charlie, who was watching him with those intelligent eyes. His head tilted as if he understood the conversation. "I'll think about it," Pete finally said. They exchanged numbers, and after Jennifer hung up, Pete sat on the couch with Charlie's head in his lap, thinking. He had spent years avoiding attention, hiding from his past, living like a ghost in his own city. But maybe it was time to step back into the light, even just a little bit. 2 days later, Pete met Jennifer Walsh at a small coffee shop in Over the Rhine, a neighborhood that had gentrified significantly since Pete's playing days. Jennifer was younger than he expected, maybe 35, with an earnest quality that put Pete at ease. She insisted on buying his coffee and didn't pull out her recorder until Pete gave permission. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. Far longer than the promised 30 minutes. Pete found himself telling Jennifer things he hadn't talked about in years. His marriage to Sarah, her death, the isolation that followed, the moment he found Charlie in that alley. Jennifer listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions, occasionally jotting notes, but mostly just letting Pete talk. When Pete explained selling his World Series memorabilia to pay for Charlie's care, Jennifer's eyes grew moist. "That must have been incredibly difficult," she said. "Those items were priceless to you." "They were just things," Pete replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Charlie needed help. The choice was pretty simple when you look at it that way. "Do your children know about Charlie?" Jennifer asked gently. The question hit harder than Pete expected. "No," he admitted. "We don't really talk much these days. That's my fault mostly. I wasn't there for them when their mother died. Wasn't there for them long before that, if I'm being honest, too focused on my own problems." Maybe this could be a bridge, Jennifer suggested. A way to reconnect. This story, what you're doing with Charlie, it shows growth, compassion. Those are things parents can be proud of. After the interview, Jennifer asked if she could come to Pete's apartment to meet Charlie and take some photographs. Pete was hesitant. His place wasn't much to look at, but he agreed. Jennifer's photographer, a quiet man named Marcus, spent an hour taking pictures of Pete and Charlie, capturing moments that Pete would later look at with amazement. In Marcus's photographs, Pete didn't see the broken-down man he saw in his mirror every morning. He saw someone who was trying, someone who was healing, someone who still mattered. The article ran in the Sunday edition of the Cincinnati Enquirer under the headline, "Pete Rose Finds Purpose Rescuing Stray Dog." It was featured prominently with several of Marcus's photographs and a heartfelt narrative that Jennifer had crafted from their conversation. She had managed to tell Pete's story without sensationalizing it, focusing on the human elements, loneliness, loss, and the unexpected redemption that came from a simple act of kindness. Pete never expected the reaction the article generated. Within hours of the paper hitting doorsteps across Cincinnati, Pete's phone began ringing. Old friends he hadn't heard from in years called to congratulate him. Neighbors he barely knew stopped him on the street to ask about Charlie. But the call that mattered most came on Sunday evening as Pete was preparing Charlie's dinner. "Dad." Pete nearly dropped the phone. It was Katie, his daughter, calling from Columbus, where she lived with her husband and two young children Pete had only met once. "Katie," Pete said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hi, honey. Dad, I saw the article. About you and the dog, Charlie." There was a long pause, and Pete could hear emotion in his daughter's voice. "Dad, that was such a beautiful thing you did. Mom would have been so proud of you." Pete had to sit down, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No, Dad, you didn't. Most people would have walked past. Most people wouldn't have sold precious memories to save a stray. You did that. You're doing that. And I'm proud of you." Those 4 words, "I'm proud of you," broke something open in Pete's chest. He couldn't remember the last time Katie had said she was proud of him, couldn't remember the last time he had done anything worth being proud of. "Can we come visit?" Katie asked. "The kids would love to meet Charlie, and Dad, I'd like to see you. Really see you, not just the obligatory holiday visits. I want to try again, if you do." "I do," Pete said quickly. "God, Katie, I do. I want that so much." They talked for over an hour, the longest conversation they'd had in years. Katie told him about her job as a teacher, about her husband Mark's promotion, about the kids and their activities. Pete told her about his daily life with Charlie, about the routines they'd established, about how the dog had nightmares, and how Pete would comfort him in the middle of the night. "You're a good dad," Katie said before they hung up. "You might not have always been, but you're trying now. That's what matters." After the call ended, Pete sat in the gathering darkness of his living room with Charlie pressed against his leg. He thought about Sarah, about how she would have loved Charlie, how she would have been the one insisting they rescue the dog. He thought about his children, about the bridges that might finally be rebuilt. He thought about the man he used to be and the man he was becoming. "We're doing okay, aren't we, buddy?" Pete said to Charlie, running his hand along the dog's back. Charlie responded by climbing into Pete's lap, something he had started doing in the past few days as he grew more comfortable and confident. The phone call from Katie opened a door Pete had thought was permanently closed. Over the following weeks, they talked regularly. Katie sent photos of the kids, and Pete sent pictures of Charlie's progress. Pete Jr. called too, tentatively at first, but warming as they found safe topics to discuss: baseball, weather, and increasingly, Charlie. "You named your dog after Grandpa Charlie?" Pete Jr. asked during one conversation. "Yeah," Pete said. "Seemed right. He was the one who taught me what really matters." "I wish I'd known him better," Pete Jr. said quietly. "I wish I'd known you better, Dad. The real you, not just the famous baseball player." "Maybe it's not too late for that," Pete offered, and his son's response gave him hope. "Maybe not." Charlie's physical recovery paralleled the healing happening in Pete's relationships. The infection cleared up completely, and after 3 weeks, Dr. Martinez declared the wound healed enough that Charlie could start putting weight on his leg again. Physical therapy began, short walks that gradually lengthened, exercises to rebuild muscle strength. Pete approached Charlie's rehabilitation with the same dedication he had once applied to baseball, tracking progress, celebrating small victories, pushing forward through setbacks. The neighborhood became familiar again as Pete walked Charlie every day. Mr. Chen at the corner store started keeping dog treats behind the counter. Mrs. Washington from the second floor would wait by her window to wave at them as they passed. The kid who worked at the gas station knew Charlie's name and always had a friendly word. Pete realized he had been invisible in his own neighborhood for years, just another anonymous face in the crowd. Charlie had made him visible again, had given him a reason to engage with the world instead of hiding from it. One cold November morning, 6 weeks after finding Charlie, Pete was walking through the park near his apartment when he saw a man sitting on a bench, head in his hands, the picture of despair. Pete's instinct was to keep walking. Mind your own business, don't get involved. But Charlie pulled toward the man, his tail wagging, and Pete found himself following. "You okay?" Pete asked, immediately feeling stupid. Of course the man wasn't okay. The man looked up, and Pete saw he was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 40, with the weathered look of someone who'd been through hard times. "Not really," the man said honestly. "Lost my job 2 weeks ago. Wife left last month. I'm staying at my sister's place, but I can feel her patience wearing thin. I just don't know what to do next." Charlie, without any prompting from Pete, walked over to the man and placed his head on the man's knee. The gesture was so deliberate, so full of empathy, that both Pete and the stranger were struck silent. "That's Charlie," Pete said, sitting down on the bench. "Found him in an alley about 6 weeks ago, half dead. Wasn't sure either of us would make it, honestly." The man stroked Charlie's head, and Pete saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. "He's a good dog." "Yeah, he is. Saved my life, really. I was where you are, maybe worse. Lost my wife 3 years ago, my kids stopped talking to me, I was just going through the motions. Charlie gave me something to wake up for." They talked for 30 minutes, Pete sharing parts of his story, the stranger, whose name was David, sharing his. Before they parted ways, Pete gave David his phone number. "If you need someone to talk to, call me," Pete said. "Sometimes it helps just to know someone else gets it." David nodded, still petting Charlie. "Thank you, and thank your dog too." As Pete and Charlie walked away, Pete thought about how much his life had changed. 2 months ago, he would have walked past David without a second glance, too absorbed in his own misery to notice someone else's pain. Charlie had taught him to be present again, to connect with the world around him instead of hiding from it. The day Katie and her family came to visit, Pete cleaned his apartment with a thoroughness it hadn't seen in years. He bought groceries for a real meal, not just the frozen dinners and canned soup that had sustained him for so long. He trimmed his beard and wore clothes that didn't have stains or holes. When Katie walked through the door with her husband Mark and their 2 children, Emma, 7, and Connor, 5, Pete felt his heart might burst. Emma had Sarah's eyes, and Connor had Pete's stubborn chin. They were beautiful, and they were his grandchildren, and he had let years pass without really knowing them. But it was Charlie who broke the ice. The kids were initially shy, unsure about this grandfather they barely knew. But Charlie, with his gentle nature and playful spirit, won them over immediately. Within minutes, Emma was sitting on the floor showing Charlie her drawings, and Connor was carefully throwing a ball for Charlie to fetch on his newly healed leg. "He's wonderful, Dad," Katie said, watching her children play with the dog. She had tears in her eyes. "I can see how much you love him, how much he's changed you." "He saved me, Katie," Pete said simply. "I was drowning, and I didn't even realize it. Charlie gave me a reason to keep going." They spent the afternoon together, the first truly relaxed family time Pete could remember in years. They looked at old photo albums, Pete telling stories about Sarah that made Katie laugh and cry. They made dinner together, the kids helping Pete prepare Charlie's food with solemn concentration. They talked about the future, about holiday plans, about more visits. As evening fell and Katie's family prepared to leave, Emma hugged Pete tightly around the waist. "I love you, Grandpa," she said, and Pete had to turn away so she wouldn't see his tears. "I love you too, sweetheart, so much." After they left, Pete sat on the couch with Charlie, the apartment feeling both emptier and fuller than it had in years. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photos Katie had sent him, pictures of the afternoon, of Emma and Connor playing with Charlie, of Pete smiling genuinely for the first time in years. "You know what, Charlie?" Pete said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "I think we're going to be okay. Both of us. We're going to be just fine." Charlie's tail thumped against the couch in agreement, and Pete felt something he hadn't experienced since before Sarah died. He felt happy. Not just content or temporarily distracted from pain, but genuinely, deeply happy. The apartment didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like home. December arrived in Cincinnati with the kind of bitter cold that made Pete's joints ache and reminded him he wasn't getting any younger. But for the first time in years, Pete looked forward to the holiday season instead of dreading it. Charlie's presence had transformed the apartment from a place Pete merely existed into a home full of warmth and purpose. Charlie had made a complete physical recovery. His leg had healed remarkably well under Dr. Martinez's care, and while he still limped slightly when tired, he could run, play, and navigate the 3 flights of stairs to Pete's apartment with increasing confidence. His coat had grown back fully, revealing the handsome brown and white coloring that Pete loved. But more importantly, Charlie's emotional recovery had been equally dramatic. The nightmares had become less frequent, occurring only occasionally now instead of nightly. Charlie no longer flinched when Pete raised his hand quickly or made sudden movements. His tail wagged constantly, and he had developed a playful streak that kept Pete on his toes. But it was Charlie's intuitive understanding of human emotion that continued to amaze Pete. The dog seemed to know when Pete was having a difficult day, when memories of Sarah hit particularly hard, or when the loneliness tried to creep back in. On those days, Charlie would stay especially close, pressing against Pete's leg or resting his head in Pete's lap, offering wordless comfort that was somehow more effective than anything a person could say. One particularly cold morning in mid-December, Pete was walking Charlie through Fountain Square when they encountered a woman sitting on a bench, crying quietly into her hands. She was elderly, maybe 75, wearing a threadbare coat that offered little protection against the biting wind. Several shopping bags sat at her feet, and she looked exhausted and defeated. Pete's first instinct was still to keep walking. Old habits died hard. But Charlie pulled toward the woman, and Pete remembered his encounter with David in the park. That had turned into an ongoing friendship, with David and Pete meeting for coffee every week to talk about job searches, life struggles, and recovery. David had found work 2 weeks ago, and he credited those conversations with Pete for helping him stay focused and positive. "Mom," Pete said gently, "are you all right? Can we help you with something?" The woman looked up, startled, and Pete saw fear flash across her face before it was replaced by resignation. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her voice cracked on the words. Charlie, as he had done with David, approached the woman and gently placed his head near her hand. The woman instinctively reached out to pet him, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "That's Charlie," Pete said, sitting down on the bench but maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm Pete. You don't look fine, if you don't mind me saying so." The woman continued petting Charlie, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm just having a very hard day, a very hard year, really." Pete nodded, understanding that pain more than she knew. Sometimes it helps to talk about it. "And Charlie here, he's a great listener." The woman smiled weakly at that, and then the story came pouring out. Her name was Margaret Hanson. Her husband had died 15 months ago after 52 years of marriage. She had been managing okay until recently, when her landlord informed her that her building was being sold and she would need to move out by January 1st. She had been apartment hunting all morning but couldn't find anything she could afford on her fixed income. "Everything is so expensive now," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "The cheapest place I found was $1,200 a month, and I only have $900 from Social Security. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to be a burden on my daughter. She has her own family to take care of." Pete listened, his heart aching for this woman who reminded him so much of his own mother, who had struggled after his father died. He thought about his apartment building, about the vacant unit on the second floor that had been empty for months. He thought about Mr. Chen mentioning that the landlord, Mrs. Kowalski, was having trouble finding tenants because she refused to raise rents to market rates. "Mrs. Hanson," Pete said slowly, an idea forming, "would you mind waiting here for just a few minutes? I need to make a phone call." He pulled out his cell phone and called Mrs. Kowalski, a woman in her 80s who owned the building and still managed it herself, out of stubbornness more than necessity. She answered on the third ring. "Mrs. Kowalski, it's Pete Rose from 3B. "Pete? How's that dog of yours? Still causing trouble?" Mrs. Kowalski had a gruff exterior, but a soft heart. She had looked the other way when Pete brought Charlie home, despite the no pets policy, saying that a man needed a dog, and that was that. "Charlie's great, Mrs. Kowalski. Listen, I know you have that vacant apartment on the second floor. Is it still available?" "Still empty," she confirmed. "Everyone wants luxury apartments these days. Nobody appreciates a good solid building with reasonable rent." "How much are you asking?" $800 a month includes heat and water. Why, you know someone." Pete looked at Margaret, still petting Charlie, lost in her own thoughts. "Yeah, I think I do. A widow, nice lady, needs a place by January 1st. Would you be willing to talk to her?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "If you vouch for her, Pete, that's good enough for me. Bring her by tomorrow morning, say 10 o'clock. I'll show her the place." After the call ended, Pete returned to Margaret and explained about the apartment. He watched as hope kindled in her eyes, replacing some of the despair that had been there moments before. $800 a month? Margaret repeated, as if she couldn't believe it. "That's within my budget. But Pete, I don't understand why you're doing this for a stranger." Pete looked down at Charlie, who had fallen asleep with his head resting on Margaret's lap. "Because somebody did it for me," he said simply. "When I found Charlie, I was in a pretty dark place. He saved me in a way. And I figure if I can help somebody else the way he helped me, that's what I should do." They exchanged phone numbers, and Pete arranged to meet Margaret at his building the next morning. As he and Charlie walked home, Pete felt a familiar warmth spreading through his chest. It was the same feeling he had gotten after rescuing Charlie, after reconnecting with Katie, after helping David in the park. The feeling of mattering, of making a positive difference in someone else's life. That evening, Pete had an idea that wouldn't let go. He pulled out his laptop and began researching volunteer opportunities in Cincinnati, specifically those involving animals and people in need. What he found surprised him. There were dozens of organizations doing incredible work, many of them desperate for volunteers. One organization in particular caught his attention: Second Chances Animal Rescue, a non-profit that rescued stray and abandoned animals and paired them with people struggling with loneliness, depression, and social isolation. The therapeutic benefits of animal companionship were well documented, and Second Chances was doing innovative work connecting vulnerable people with vulnerable animals. Pete read through their website, learning about their programs. They placed rescue animals with elderly people in nursing homes, with veterans struggling with PTSD, with at-risk youth who needed positive outlets for their energy and emotions. They provided the animals veterinary care, food, and support to make sure both the humans and animals thrived in these relationships. Before he could second-guess himself, Pete clicked on the volunteer button and filled out an application. In the section asking about relevant experience, he wrote about finding Charlie, about the journey they had been on together, about how the dog had transformed his life. He hit submit before he could change his mind. 2 days later, Pete received a phone call from Sarah Chen, the director of Second Chances Animal Rescue. She had read his application with great interest, particularly after recognizing his name from the newspaper article that had run weeks earlier. "Mr. Rose, we would love to have you volunteer with us," Sarah said. "Your story with Charlie is exactly what we're trying to facilitate for others. Would you be interested in becoming a foster coordinator? You would help match rescue animals with potential foster families, provide support during the adjustment period, and share your experience about the challenges and rewards of animal rescue." Pete was taken aback. He had expected maybe to walk dogs or clean cages, not to be offered a position with real responsibility. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for that," he said honestly. "I've only had Charlie for a few months." "Mr. Rose, qualification isn't just about time or formal training. It's about understanding what it means to rescue and be rescued. You understand that better than most people ever will. Besides," Sarah added warmly, "we provide training and support. You wouldn't be doing this alone." Pete agreed to attend a volunteer orientation the following week. When he hung up the phone, he looked at Charlie, who was watching him with those intelligent eyes. "What do you think, buddy?" Pete asked. "Think we can help some other dogs and people find what we found?" Charlie's tail wagged enthusiastically, and Pete laughed. He was learning to trust his instincts again, to believe that he had something valuable to offer the world beyond just existing in it. The volunteer orientation was held in a renovated warehouse on the west side of Cincinnati that served as Second Chances headquarters. Pete arrived early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his early days in baseball. Would the other volunteers recognize him? Would they judge him? Would he be any good at this? His worries evaporated when he met the other volunteers. There were 15 people attending the orientation, ranging in age from 22 to 76, from all walks of life: a retired nurse, a young software engineer, a middle school teacher, a veteran. Nobody seemed to care who Pete had been or what his past looked like. They cared about why he was there, and his answer to help others find what he found with Charlie resonated with everyone in the room. Sarah Chen led the orientation with warmth and expertise. She explained Second Chance's mission, their programs, and the critical role volunteers played in their success. She shared statistics about the therapeutic benefits of animal companionship: reduced depression and anxiety, decreased feelings of loneliness, improved physical health through increased activity and routine. But beyond the statistics, Sarah said, are the individual stories. The elderly man who hadn't smiled in months after losing his wife, who now grins ear to ear when his dog greets him each morning. The teenager struggling with depression who found purpose in caring for a rescue cat. The veteran with PTSD who sleeps through the night for the first time in years because his dog alerts him when nightmares start. These are the moments that make what we do meaningful. Pete felt those words resonate deep in his soul. That was exactly what Charlie had done for him, given him a reason to smile again, a purpose beyond just surviving, a companion who eased the nightmares of loss and regret. During a break, Pete found himself talking to another volunteer, a man named Robert who had served in Afghanistan and struggled with PTSD after his return. Robert had been paired with a German Shepherd mix named Duke through Second Chances 3 years ago, and he credited the organization with saving his life. "Before Duke, I couldn't leave my apartment without having panic attacks," Robert explained. "I pushed away everyone who tried to help, but Duke, he didn't judge. He didn't get frustrated when I had bad days. He just stayed with me, and slowly I started to heal. Now I volunteer to help other veterans find what I found. Pete shared his own story with Robert, and they discovered a kinship born from understanding what it meant to be rescued by an animal you thought you were rescuing. They exchanged numbers, and Pete sensed this was the beginning of another meaningful friendship. Pete began volunteering at Second Chances 3 days a week. His role was exactly what Sarah had described, matching rescue animals with potential foster families, providing support during the adjustment period, and sharing his experience. But what he didn't expect was how fulfilling the work would be. Each week, Pete met with people considering fostering or adopting a rescue animal. Some were elderly and lonely, like Margaret had been. Others were young families wanting to teach their children about compassion and responsibility. Still others were people struggling with mental health issues, hoping an animal companion might ease their suffering. Pete listened to their stories, assessed their situations, and carefully matched them with animals that would suit their needs and lifestyles. He drew on his experience with Charlie, understanding that the right match was crucial for success. He provided honest advice about the challenges they would face, the medical issues, the behavioral problems, the emotional ups and downs of helping a traumatized animal heal. But he also shared the rewards. The unconditional love, the sense of purpose, the profound satisfaction of saving a life and having that life save you in return. One of Pete's first matches was a young woman named Jessica, a college student struggling with severe anxiety and depression. She had been considering dropping out of school, overwhelmed by the pressures of academic life and social isolation. Pete introduced her to Mittens, a shy calico cat who had been surrendered after her elderly owner passed away. Mittens needs someone patient, Pete explained to Jessica. Someone who understands that trust takes time. She's scared and unsure, but with the right person, she'll bloom. Pete saw something in Jessica's eyes when she looked at Mittens. Recognition. Jessica understood what it felt like to be scared and unsure, to need someone patient and understanding. The match was perfect. Jessica adopted Mittens, and over the following weeks, Pete checked in regularly to see how they were doing. The transformation was remarkable. Jessica found that caring for Mittens gave her a reason to maintain routines, to get out of bed on difficult days, to stay present instead of spiraling into anxiety. "She needs me," Jessica told Pete during one of their check-ins, "and somehow knowing that she needs me makes me feel like I matter. Like my life has purpose beyond just getting through classes and trying not to have panic attacks." These success stories accumulated quickly. Pete helped match dozens of animals with new families over the winter months, and the success rate was remarkably high. Sarah Chen told him his intuition for matching was exceptional, that he seemed to understand both the animals and the people on a level that couldn't be taught. Pete knew why. He understood brokenness. He understood what it felt like to need saving. And he understood that sometimes the best healers are those who have been wounded themselves. On Christmas Eve, Pete hosted his first real gathering in years. His small apartment was packed with people. Katie and her family, Pete Jr., who had flown in from Colorado, David and his wife Margaret from downstairs, Dr. Maria Martinez with her own rescue dog, Robert the veteran, and several other people Pete had befriended through Second Chances. The apartment was chaos, people talking and laughing, Charlie playing with the other dogs, Emma and Connor showing everyone their drawings of Charlie that they'd made at school. Pete moved through the crowd with a sense of wonder, barely able to believe this was his life now. He had spent the previous 3 Christmases alone, ordering takeout and falling asleep on the couch watching old movies, trying not to think about Sarah and all the holidays they'd shared together. This Christmas was different. The apartment was full of warmth and life and connection. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Katie pulled Pete aside in the kitchen. "Dad," she said, tears in her eyes, "this is incredible. Look at what you've built here. Look at all these people who care about you, who you've helped. I'm so proud of you." Pete hugged his daughter, feeling the weight of those words settle over him. "I was lost, Katie. Completely lost. And then I found Charlie. Or he found me. And everything started to change. It wasn't just finding Charlie," Katie said. "It was choosing to help him. Choosing to engage with life again instead of hiding from it. That choice saved you, Dad. And then you chose to keep making that choice again and again, helping other people and animals. That's what I'm proud of." After everyone left, Pete sat on his couch with Charlie pressed against his side. The apartment was a mess, dishes piled in the sink, wrapping paper scattered across the floor, dog toys everywhere. But it was the beautiful kind of mess, the kind that comes from a home full of love and life. Pete pulled out his phone and looked at a text message he'd received earlier that day. It was from Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had written the original article about him and Charlie. "Pete, I hope you're having a wonderful Christmas. I wanted you to know that your story has inspired something incredible." Second Chances has received over $75,000 in donations since the article ran, and their volunteer applications have tripled. You've created a ripple effect that's touching hundreds of lives. Thank you for letting me tell your story. Jennifer. Pete read the message 3 times, struggling to process what it meant. His choice to help Charlie had inspired others to help more animals, which had improved countless lives, both human and animal. The ripple effect extended far beyond what he could see or measure. He thought about Margaret, now settled happily in her apartment downstairs. He thought about David, who had found employment and was rebuilding his life. He thought about Jessica and Mittens, about Robert and Duke, about all the matches he had facilitated through Second Chances. Each connection represented lives transformed, hope restored, purpose rediscovered. "We did good, Charlie," Pete whispered, stroking the dog's head. "You and me, we did something that mattered." Charlie looked up at him with those same intelligent, soulful eyes that had first captured Pete's attention in that dark alley. The fear and desperation were gone, replaced by contentment and trust. Charlie had healed, and in healing he had healed Pete. Pete's phone buzzed with another message, this time from Pete Jr. "Dad, thank you for today. It meant everything to me and to Katie. We got our father back. We got our family back. Charlie gave that to us. Love you." Pete had to wipe tears from his eyes as he typed back, "Love you too, son. So much." As Pete prepared for bed that night, he reflected on the journey of the past 3 months. 3 months ago, he had been a man with nothing, no purpose, no connections, no hope. He had been waiting to die, marking time until his body gave out or his loneliness consumed him completely. Now he had everything that truly mattered. He had his family back. He had friends who cared about him. He had meaningful work that made a difference in the world. He had a reason to wake up every morning and a home that felt warm and alive. All because he had stopped in a dark alley on a rainy October night to help a dying dog. Spring arrived in Cincinnati with an explosion of color that seemed to mirror the transformation in Pete Rose's life. The dogwoods along the streets burst into pink and white blooms, and the morning air carried the scent of fresh grass and new beginnings. Pete walked through Eden Park with Charlie, the dog moving with confidence and joy, showing no signs of the trauma he had endured. 6 months had passed since that October night, and Pete's life had evolved in ways he never could have imagined. His work with Second Chances had expanded beyond just matching animals with families. Sarah Chen had asked him to lead a new program called Second Chances for Seniors, focused specifically on pairing elderly rescue animals with elderly people. The program was based on a simple but powerful idea. Older animals were often overlooked at shelters in favor of puppies and kittens, just as older people were often overlooked by society. Both groups had so much to offer, so much love to give, but they needed someone to see their value and create opportunities for connection. Pete threw himself into the program with passion and dedication. He visited nursing homes and senior living facilities across Cincinnati, talking to residents about the benefits of animal companionship. He brought Charlie with him on these visits, and the dog's gentle nature and obvious bond with Pete served as a powerful testament to what rescue could achieve. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of elderly people signed up for the program, eager for the companionship and purpose an animal could provide. Pete carefully matched each person with an appropriate animal, considering mobility issues, living situations, and personality compatibility. One of his most successful matches was between a 90-year-old World War II veteran named Frank and a 15-year-old cat named Shadow. Frank had been withdrawn and depressed since moving into an assisted living facility, barely speaking to staff or other residents. Shadow had been surrendered after his owner developed severe allergies, and at 15 years old, his chances of adoption had been slim. Pete introduced them on a warm April morning. Frank sat in a wheelchair in the facility's courtyard, his expression blank and disinterested. But when Pete placed Shadow in Frank's lap, something shifted. The old cat immediately curled up and began purring, and Frank's weathered hand reached out to stroke Shadow's fur. "He's a good cat," Frank said, the first words Pete had heard him speak. "He is," Pete agreed, "and he needs someone who understands what it's like to have lived a long life. Someone patient and kind. I think you two might be perfect for each other." 3 weeks later, Pete visited Frank and Shadow for a follow-up check. The transformation was remarkable. Frank was smiling, engaged, talking to other residents about his cat. Shadow had gained weight and seemed more alert and playful than he had been at the shelter. The staff told Pete that Frank now had something to live for, a reason to get up each morning and maintain his health so he could continue caring for Shadow. "You gave me back my life," Frank told Pete during that visit. "I thought I was just waiting to die. Now I'm living again." These stories became common in Pete's work. Each match represented 2 beings, human and animal, who had been discarded or overlooked, coming together to create something beautiful and healing. Pete documented every success story, partly for Second Chances records, but mostly because he never wanted to forget what choosing compassion could achieve. One afternoon in early May, Pete received a phone call that would change the trajectory of his work. It was from a woman named Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a researcher at the University of Cincinnati, studying the therapeutic effects of animal companionship on mental health and social isolation. "Mr. Rose," Dr. Rodriguez said, "I've been following your work with Second Chances, particularly your seniors program. The success rate you're achieving is remarkable. Over 90% of your matches result in permanent adoptions with significant improvements in well-being for both the humans and animals involved. I'd like to study your methodology with the goal of replicating it in other cities." Pete was stunned. "I don't really have a methodology. I just try to understand what people and animals need and then match them carefully. That intuition you have, that's what we want to understand and potentially teach others," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Would you be willing to work with me? We could document your process, interview the people and animals you've matched, and create a framework that other organizations could use." Pete agreed, though he felt somewhat overwhelmed by the idea that his work was significant enough to merit academic study. Over the following weeks, Dr. Rodriguez shadowed Pete as he conducted matches, interviewed the people and animals in his program, and carefully documented the factors that contributed to successful pairings. What emerged from the research was fascinating. Dr. Rodriguez found that Pete's success came from a combination of empathy, patience, and lived experience. Because Pete had been through his own journey of rescue and healing, he could recognize the same needs in others. He understood that healing wasn't linear, that setbacks were normal, that what people needed most was patience and unconditional support. "You're not just matching animals with people," Dr. Rodriguez explained to Pete after completing her initial research. "You're facilitating a specific type of therapeutic relationship based on mutual rescue. Both the human and the animal have been wounded in some way, and you're creating opportunities for them to heal each other. That's profound, Mr. Rose. That's revolutionary." The research led to Pete being invited to speak at a national conference on animal-assisted therapy in Chicago. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of animal welfare professionals, veterinarians, and mental health experts, Pete felt more nervous than he had in any baseball game. But when he began telling his story, finding Charlie, selling his memorabilia, the journey of healing they'd shared, the nerves faded. This was real. This mattered. And if sharing his experience could help more people and animals find what he and Charlie had found, then he would tell his story as many times as needed. The presentation was received with a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people approached Pete, wanting to implement similar programs in their cities. Pete exchanged contact information with animal rescue directors from Seattle to Miami, from Portland to Atlanta. His small act of kindness in a Cincinnati alley was creating a movement that extended across the country. But Pete's most important relationships remained close to home. His family had become a regular presence in his life again. Katie and her family visited twice a month. Pete Jr. had fully relocated back to Cincinnati, and they had dinner together every week. Emma and Connor considered Charlie their dog too, and they had become passionate advocates for animal rescue, telling everyone at their schools about their grandfather's work. One Sunday afternoon, Pete's entire family gathered at Eden Park for a picnic. Katie and Mark spread blankets on the grass, while Emma and Connor played fetch with Charlie. Pete Jr. helped Pete unpack the food they'd brought: fried chicken, potato salad, Sarah's recipe for coleslaw that Katie had learned to make. "Dad," Katie said as they sat together watching the kids play with Charlie, "do you remember what you said to me 3 years ago, right after Mom died?" Pete tensed, afraid of what memory she was about to bring up. "Those days after Sarah's death were a blur of pain and failure. You said you didn't know how to keep living without her," Katie continued softly. "You said everything felt pointless. I was so angry at you for saying that, for giving up when we needed you. But I understand now. Grief is devastating. It strips away your sense of purpose and connection." She turned to look at Pete, tears in her eyes. "But look at you now, Dad. You found a way to keep living, not just surviving, but truly living. You found purpose and connection in the most unexpected place. You saved Charlie, and he saved you, and then you both saved so many others. That's beautiful, Dad. That's what Mom would have wanted for you." Pete couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He just reached out and took his daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "I wish I could tell her," Pete finally managed to say. "I wish I could tell Sarah about everything that's happened, about Charlie, about the work with Second Chances, about getting my family back. I think she'd be happy for me." "She knows," Katie said firmly. "Wherever she is, she knows, and she's proud of you." As summer approached, Pete's work with Second Chances continued to expand. The seniors program had been so successful that they launched similar initiatives for veterans, for at-risk youth, for people struggling with chronic illness. Each program followed the same basic principle Pete had discovered with Charlie, that rescue was reciprocal, that helping another being heal was often what healed us. Pete trained other volunteers in his matching methodology, teaching them to look beyond surface characteristics to understand the deeper needs of both humans and animals. He emphasized patience, emphasized the importance of ongoing support, emphasized that successful matches were about more than just placing an animal in a home. "You're not just facilitating adoptions," Pete told a group of new volunteers during a training session. "You're creating relationships that have the potential to transform lives. That's sacred work. That's work that matters." One of Pete's trainees was a young woman named Amanda, who had recently lost her mother to cancer. She came to second chances, hoping to find purpose in her grief, much like Pete had. Pete took her under his wing, teaching her everything he had learned about matching and supporting rescue relationships. "I see so much of myself in you," Pete told Amanda one afternoon as they prepared animals for an adoption event. "That lost feeling, that sense that life has become something to endure rather than embrace. But you're here. You're choosing to help. That's the first step toward healing." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "How long does it take? The healing?" "I don't think it ever completely finishes," Pete said honestly. "But it changes. The pain becomes less sharp. You start having good days again. You start feeling connected to life again. For me, Charlie was the catalyst for that change. You'll find your catalyst too." The adoption event that day was one of the most successful Second Chances had ever hosted. Over 40 animals found forever homes, including 3 senior dogs that Pete had been worried would be overlooked. He watched families leave with their new companions, saw the joy and excitement on children's faces, saw the quiet contentment on the faces of elderly adopters who finally had something to care for again. As Pete was packing up at the end of the event, a teenager approached him. The boy was maybe 16, with the angry, defensive posture of someone who had learned to expect disappointment from life. "You're Pete Rose," the boy said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Pete confirmed. "My counselor sent me here. Said I should talk to you about fostering a dog, but I don't see the point. I'm in the foster system myself. I bounce between homes. Why would I want to take on a dog when I can barely take care of myself?" Pete recognized the pain beneath the anger, the fear beneath the bravado. He saw himself in this boy, lost, defensive, convinced that connection meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant pain. "What's your name?" Pete asked. "Marcus." "Marcus, can I tell you something? 6 months ago, I was in a really dark place. I'd lost my wife. My kids weren't speaking to me. I had nothing to live for. I was just going through the motions, waiting for it all to end. And then I found a dog in an alley, a dying dog that any sensible person would have walked past. Taking him in was the most illogical thing I could have done. I had no money, no resources, nothing." Pete paused, making sure Marcus was listening. The boy's defensive posture had softened slightly. "But I took him home anyway. And that choice, that one choice to help instead of walking away, it changed everything. It gave me purpose. It connected me back to life. It eventually led to all of this." Pete gestured at the Second Chances facility, at the volunteers cleaning up, at the last few families completing adoption paperwork. "Fostering a dog won't solve all your problems," Pete continued. "It won't make your situation perfect, but it will give you something to care about beyond your own pain. And sometimes that's enough to start healing." Marcus considered this for a long moment. "What kind of dog?" Pete smiled. He had him. "Come with me. I want to introduce you to someone." Pete led Marcus to the kennels where they kept the dogs that hadn't been adopted that day. In the back corner was a young pit bull mix, maybe 8 months old, with one ear that flopped and scars on his face from obvious abuse. The dog had been found chained in a yard, starved and beaten, and he was aggressive with most people. But when Marcus approached the kennel, something shifted. The dog's aggressive posture softened. His tail gave a tentative wag, and Marcus, despite his tough exterior, knelt down in front of the kennel with obvious interest. "His name is Rocky," Pete said. "He's had a rough start. Been through some things that no animal should experience. He doesn't trust easily, and he's got some behavioral issues we're working through. Nobody wanted to adopt him today because he's considered too difficult." Marcus reached his fingers through the kennel mesh, and Rocky carefully sniffed them before giving them a gentle lick. "He's like me," Marcus said quietly. "Nobody wants him because he's damaged." "No," Pete said firmly. "He's not damaged. He's wounded. There's a difference. Wounded things can heal, and sometimes the best way to heal is by helping someone else heal. You and Rocky, you understand each other. You could help each other." 2 weeks later, Marcus and Rocky were officially matched as a foster pair. The organization worked with Marcus's current foster family to ensure they were on board and provided all the necessary supplies and support. Pete checked in with Marcus regularly, providing guidance and encouragement as the boy and dog navigated their new relationship. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Marcus became more responsible, more engaged, more hopeful. Rocky became less aggressive, more trusting, more playful. They were healing each other, exactly as Pete had predicted. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Marcus told Pete during one of their check-ins. "Or on Rocky. Everyone else did." "I know what it feels like to be given up on," Pete replied. "And I know what it feels like when someone chooses to believe in you anyway. That's what Charlie did for me. Now, I'm just paying it forward." As autumn approached again, marking a full year since Pete had found Charlie, Second Chances organized a celebration. They called it the Second Chances Success Stories Celebration, and they invited everyone who had adopted or fostered an animal through the organization over the past year. Over 200 people showed up to Eden Park on a beautiful September afternoon, bringing their rescue animals with them. The park was filled with dogs of all sizes and breeds, cats in carriers, even a few rabbits and guinea pigs. Children played with puppies, elderly people sat on benches surrounded by their animal companions, veterans gathered with their service dogs. Pete stood at the edge of the gathering with Charlie at his side, overwhelmed by what he was seeing. A year ago, he had been alone, isolated, convinced his life no longer had meaning. Now he was surrounded by a community built on compassion and second chances. Sarah Chen approached with a broad smile. "Pete, this is incredible. Over 200 successful matches in 1 year. And the success rate, 93% permanent placements with significant improvements in well-being. You've created something truly special here." "Charlie created it," Pete corrected. "I just followed his lead." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Charlie gave you an opportunity. You chose to take it. And then you chose to keep choosing compassion again and again. That's all you, Pete." The celebration included speeches from people whose lives had been transformed by rescue. Frank, the World War II veteran, spoke about how Shadow had given him reason to live again. Jessica, the anxious college student, talked about how Mittens had helped her manage her mental health. Marcus, the teenager from foster care, shared how Rocky had taught him that healing was possible even after trauma. Each story reinforced what Pete had learned over the past year, that rescue was reciprocal, that choosing to help another being was often what saved us, that love and purpose could be found in the most unexpected places. When it was Pete's turn to speak, he walked to the microphone with Charlie at his side, looking out at the crowd of people and animals, all of them there because someone had chosen compassion over indifference. Pete felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "A year ago tonight," Pete began, his voice amplified by the speaker system, "I was walking down a street in the rain, completely alone, convinced my life no longer had meaning. I was lost in grief, isolated from my family, disconnected from everything that made life worth living. I was existing but not really alive." The crowd was silent, listening intently. Charlie sat calmly at Pete's feet, as if he understood the significance of this moment. And then, I heard a sound from a dark alley. A whimper, a cry for help, and I made a choice that changed everything. I stopped. I walked into that alley. I picked up a dying dog and decided to help him, even though I had no money, no resources, no real reason to believe things would work out. Pete paused, looking down at Charlie. The dog looked back at him with those same intelligent, soulful eyes. That dog was Charlie, and Charlie saved my life, not by doing anything heroic or dramatic, but simply by needing me, by giving me purpose when I had none, by showing me that I still had something to offer the world. Pete's voice cracked with emotion, but he continued, "Every single person here has a story like mine. Someone who was lost and was found. Someone who thought they were rescuing an animal, but discovered the animal was rescuing them. Someone who learned that second chances are real, that healing is possible, that we're never too broken to start again." He gestured to the crowd before him, to the hundreds of people and animals gathered in the park. This is what rescue really means. It's not just about saving animals, though that's vitally important. It's about saving ourselves. It's about choosing connection over isolation, love over fear, hope over despair. It's about recognizing that we all need help sometimes, and being brave enough to both ask for it and offer it. The crowd erupted in applause, and Pete felt tears streaming down his face. These were happy tears, tears of gratitude and fulfillment and profound connection. After his speech, people lined up to talk to Pete, to share their own stories, to thank him for inspiring them to rescue an animal. He listened to each person, offered encouragement and advice, exchanged contact information, built connections. As the sun began to set and the crowd started to disperse, Katie, Pete Jr. and the grandchildren found Pete sitting on a bench with Charlie. "That was beautiful, Dad," Katie said, sitting beside him. "Mom would have been so proud." Emma and Connor climbed onto the bench, one on each side of Pete, and the family sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Grandpa," Emma said, "when I grow up, I want to help animals like you do." Pete felt his heart swell. "Then you'll be carrying on something important, sweetheart. making sure that lost things get found, that broken things get healed, that everyone gets a second chance. That night, after his family had gone home and the celebration had ended, Pete sat in his apartment with Charlie, reflecting on the journey of the past year. His small apartment was no longer sparse and empty. It was filled with photos of the animals he had matched, with thank you cards from grateful adopters, with evidence of a life fully lived. Pete pulled out his phone and opened the photo album. He scrolled through images from the past year. Charlie on his first day home, thin and scared. Charlie with Emma and Connor at their first meeting. Charlie at the adoption events. Charlie with some of the animals Pete had matched. And then Pete found a photo he hadn't looked at in months, a picture of Sarah taken 20 years ago, laughing at something Pete had said. He touched the screen gently, a gesture that had become ritual. "I did it, Sarah," Pete whispered. "I found a way to keep living, to really live, not just survive. Charlie showed me how, and now we're helping others find the same thing." His phone buzzed with a text message. "Mr. Rose, my name is Tom. I lost my wife 6 months ago, and I've been struggling. I saw your speech at the park today. I think maybe I need a dog. Can you help me?" Pete smiled and typed back, "Yes, I can help. Come by Second Chances tomorrow. We'll find the perfect match for you." As he hit send, Pete realized this was what the rest of his life would look like, helping others find what he had found with Charlie, creating connections that healed, facilitating relationships that transformed lives. Outside, the city lights of Cincinnati twinkled in the darkness. Inside Pete's warm apartment, Charlie slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams rescued dogs dream. And Pete Rose, once lost and now found, sat surrounded by evidence of a life that mattered and felt complete. The journey that had begun in a dark alley on a rainy October night had led him here, to purpose, to connection, to family, to love. One man and one dog, choosing to help each other when it would have been easier to walk away. That choice had changed everything. And Pete knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again every single day for the rest of his life.